we've actually got two questions here. One from Michael Pern, or Pern, and one from the legendary Alan from the Discord.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty much the same thing, though. Hi, DF crew! Exclamation point! Can you ever play a game after reviewing and be able to ignore the flaws you found during the analysis? What flaws can you ignore and not ignore to try to engage with the game again?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this one from Alan. Hello, Richard, Alex, John, or Oliver! Exclamation point. You all play a lot of games for DF! Exclamation point. How do you switch off when playing games in personal time? Are you able to disable your analytical eyes? P.S. Richard, when are you going to unbox your PSVR 2? I got it at launch. I still haven't unboxed it, and I've got no plans to until I've actually got a game that, and indeed time to play it. But I do really want to play GT7. Anyway, I'm going to go to you, Alex, first of all, because you're very time constrained. And the question is, do you still enjoy playing games? And are you able to turn off your critical, analytical gaze?
Yeah, I mean, I can turn that off if the game is really, really compelling. A modern game, modern AAA game I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about, something else. Because I don't tend to have that analytical eye when I'm playing a game that isn't a modern AAA game, because I realize the limitations of the hardware of the time or the software development of the time, and I just play it. But I can turn off my analytical gaze if I'm very engrossed in a game. For example, when I was playing like Returnal on PS5 at launch, the game had some frame rate dips here and there when you get into like the larger combats, and the image quality wasn't like good necessarily. It was fine. But I played a good deal into that. And I was having a really good time at launch there. And I can definitely, but as I say that, though, when I do find the time to actually game for myself, it is very, very rarely like the latest, hottest release, because I find myself with a really large back catalog of games that I've always been really interested in trying to play. And so I'll tend to actually play games that are like 10 years old almost, because I missed them back then and I wanted to get into them. Like most recently, I wanted to try and play Alpha Protocol, which I've never played. And that's a lot of fun, but it's a game that is like very technically has problems on a lot of levels, but I'm not playing the game for that reason. So yeah, I can get into it, but if I'm going to play a game by myself, it is very, very rarely a very modern one. It's probably something a lot older, actually.
Okay. John, I'm curious about this because often you do your gameplay while you're reviewing. And then maybe you continue directly afterwards. Do you feel that the reviewing process compromises your enjoyment of it?
Not really. I mean, a little bit, in the sense that like I don't use things like HDR most of the time because I have to capture in SDR, so I miss a little bit. Or, so there's a little bit of a hit to it. But yeah, usually I just continue from there and keep playing. But as to whether the analysis affects anything, it really depends on what the issue is. Like I'm really sensitive to things like poor frame pacing or like wildly inconsistent frame rates without VRR. That stuff drives me nuts, and I actually find it difficult to get into some games for that. But I also like the way slowdown and dips used to occur is different than it is in the more modern stuff. Like I can go back to like PS2 or earlier era and it's usually fine, even if there's slowdown, because of how they V-synced the screen and the way the slowdown manifests. Whereas once you get to like PS3 era is really bad because it's like just screen tearing everywhere and like really nasty inconsistency that just look wildly unpleasant. That I think is much, much worse than anything that came before it. Like I'd sooner play a 15 to 20 FPS N64 game over your average multi-platform PS3 title. I actually think it looks less bad to my eyes, because at least on N64 it was a bit more consistent, even if it was
low. At least 15. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like it's just the nature of how things used to update. So I don't know. So I'm okay usually with retro games that have dips and issues more so. It's just inconsistent frame pacing and screen tearing are two things that really drive me nuts. Though that said, I also I loved Bloodborne. I thought it was one of the coolest games I'd ever played, and that did not run well. So it didn't prevent me from really liking Bloodborne. I just wish there was a way to play without it.
Mm-hmm.
It is an interesting thing because the existence, we kind of mostly in a multi-platform world at this point, where if there are issues with the console version, there are usually ways and means to bypass it by playing it on PC.
Right.
Yeah.
And you just can get a better experience in some respects if you've got the appropriate hardware on PC anyway. So, there's ways and means to bypass some of the issues you see on consoles. And ultimately, I think the only thing that really bugs me is stuttering. I mean, there's some issues. And, I'm just thinking of issues on games that I have played a bit recently that, we highlighted in our reviews. For example, I think we can safely say that the image quality in Alan Wake 2, they switched to FSR2. It's quite low resolutions. It's a bit poor, some of the image quality. Mm-hmm. Doesn't bother me that much. I'm still going to be playing because the game's great. And technically it is solid. But at the same time, I can just move to the PC version and run at native or DLSS, which just sort of solves the problem. I guess the thing that you just can't solve is the stuttering issues, traversal stutters and stuff. That does bother me a bit, but it is less of an issue, as we saw recently on Hellblade 2, which doesn't seem to have that issue. So I guess the diversity of choice of where you play actually helps a great deal as well.
Mm-hmm.
Anything to add to that?
I mean, just to really say the stuttering thing, like, for example, I'm not going to beat the Dead Space remake on PC, probably until 10 years from now. I just I got past the med bay and I was just really annoyed with it, because it's traversal stutter. So shader compilation stutter can technically go away over keeping the same driver, and if the game doesn't keep introducing new artwork into the game. Some games do, though, which is obviously a big problem. But for games that have traversal stutter and they have especially a hub world, essentially Dead Space is kind of like a hub world where you're returning and going back and forth between places all the time, and the entire game's structured that way. Oh, I just won't play it. But, something like a game that only has shader compilation stutter for the first hour and a half of play, technically I can brute force my brain to just forget about it. I can drink enough, I can smoke enough. I don't know. I'll feel better afterward. But yeah, I can kind of ignore shader compilation stutter if I keep the same driver over a certain amount of time, I guess.
That's actually an interesting way to approach the question. John, have there been any games you've looked at, you've reviewed, that you haven't continued playing because of the technical issues?
Dragon's Dogma 2, I found to be really, really tricky to enjoy because the technical issues were just too significant. So I'm I don't really like that. Also, again, I didn't actually do the video for it, but I was really looking forward to Jedi Survivor, and it's just it had major issues on every platform, especially PC. The PC version is abysmal. It's so bad. I'm just and they never actually really fixed the first game either, and Survivor is just worse, I would say.
It is.
So it's kind of mind blowing. I did a John versus video on Gotham Knights. I did not continue playing Gotham Knights. I can tell you that much.
I would love to see you playing the PC version of Jedi Survivor.
Oh, you know what? That actually might be a good John versus video at some point, because that would be pretty darn funny, I think.
Because just the first level, the Coruscant level, is a car crash.
It's going to be... I got to make sure I capture my first time running the game and go through the whole thing straight from zero. I think it's going to be unpleasant.
Even if it's the second time, it's still deeply unpleasant.
Right.
Yeah, I'd say that based on the recent benchmarking I did.
With my current installation of Windows, though, I have since refreshed it since I first tried Jedi Survivor on PC. So this PC is a Jedi Survivor virgin, if you will. We'll see how that goes. Another one, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, because I sometimes enjoyed as dumb campaigns, but it starts off pretty cool, actually. I was like, all right, this is cool, but then you start playing and it just goes off a cliff and you're like, what the frick happened here? It's super weird how it just kind of dies on you in that sense. Oh, Redfall.
Yeah.
It's a shame,
As soon as I finished covering that, I put it down and never really touched it again. And this is a shame because I liked aspects of it, but it was real messy initially.
Yeah. That's an unfortunate one where they never got rid of the traversal stutter as well. It's all over the PC version still, technically.
There haven't been any PC games where they've got rid of the traversal stutter. Dead silence.
It's a really good question.
I can't actually...
I just think it's inherent in the design of Unreal Engine unless you sort of are designing around it from day one.
Yeah, I don't think you can just patch it out.
I actually can't think of any game for especially an Unreal one. No.
It's too deep a problem.
You know, the only thing I kind of think, it's not an Unreal game though, is Baldur's Gate 3 did do a lot to help the frame rate in the third act. It's still not perfect, but it's also not an Unreal game. And it wasn't like, it was more like due to the NPCs, less so just walking around the environment no matter where you were. So but that's one thing that is never eliminated usually. So going back requires nth degree hardware that we don't have, and I just won't play the game usually.